This is Sunny Corner, slightly misnamed I think, but I thought I'd come here because what I want to chat about is yet more on this Bell Hotel thing. So I've seen a few news stories about appeals and cross appeals and applications to the Supreme Court and all that sort of nonsense. So what I thought is I'll just take the opportunity to try to explain what's actually going on there, because it is a little bit confusing. I got very confused myself just trying to figure it out. So just to go back to the history of this. Basically, the local council in Epping brought a case against the owners of the Bell Hotel for an injunction saying that they could no longer house asylum seekers. They applied in the interim for an interim injunction, and the court granted that. Now, just to sort of say, this first hearing, this wasn't the full hearing, this was just we'd like a hearing about whether this injunction should be made permanent, but in the interim, can you make an injunction? And the court made the temporary interim injunction and said, okay, we'll thrash this out and see whether this should be made permanent at a future hearing. So that was the position. Then the Home Office appealed that decision, and they said, we should have been allowed to be heard on that as what we call an intervener. And you can see my previous videos, I won't reiterate all the details there, but they said we need to be heard on this because obviously we've got a bit of a vested interest here. And they went along and they applied for permission to appeal, because you need permission to appeal. They said two things should happen. First of all, we should be allowed to be heard. And secondly, can you overturn this temporary injunction in the meantime until this is all sorted out in the future? And that was allowed. So two things happened there. First of all, the appeal court said, okay, we will allow you to intervene at a full hearing. And also we'll overturn that injunction pending everything being resolved. And that's gone off to October the 13th. Now, just to say, the October the 13th is itself the full appeal. So it's by far from all over this. So on October the 13th, the council say, right, now we have been heard and things, this first decision should be overturned. And the appeal court there can do a couple of things. I mean, they could just reject the appeal and say, no, it all goes back to square one. They could allow the appeal and substitute their own reasoning and say, actually, there's no point in going back for a first instance hearing. We can make this decision. Okay, we're going to either allow or disallow this injunction. Or they can say, okay, we've heard this, we think the council should be allowed to intervene and put their full argument, but we're going to remit it back to the first instance court for them to decide. So what else happened? Well, the local authority, Epping, they tried to go to the House of Lords, or the Supreme Court, on that appeal being allowed. So they said, you shouldn't have allowed the Home Office to intervene, and you shouldn't have overturned the injunction, and that was knocked back. Now, just to sort of say, there's nothing unusual about that. When you seek permission to appeal, because there's very few appeals as of right, you need permission or leave, as we sometimes call it. And sometimes you ask the first instance court, you say, okay, you've just made your decision, fair enough, we think you got that wrong, can you give us permission to appeal your decision? And sometimes a court might say, actually, well, yeah, fair enough, there was that law that we came down on one side of the law, but there's probably an argument that it could have equally come down on the other side of the law. So yeah, we'll give you permission to appeal. Usually they don't, though, because usually they say, well, no, I think got that right by definition. So if you want to appeal, you have to go to the appellate court. So you can, if you get knocked back by the first instance court, you can then go to the court you wish to appeal to and say, how about you giving us a bit of leave to appeal? So in this particular case, they got knocked back by what was the Court of Appeal, just to confuse things. So they applied to the Court of Appeal and said, you've allowed this appeal, or given permission for this appeal. We don't think you should have done. We'd like the Supreme Court to have a look at this. And that court's gone and said no. They went off to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's come back and said, no, you can't do that. Nothing surprising there whatsoever. The Supreme Court control their own docket. And generally speaking, they will only allow cases if it's of a wider public interest. So it's not just this affects one party, it would have to affect people generally. Now, personally, I think it probably could. You could argue that this is in the wider public interest because, there's lots of councils and lots of hotels. Also, some people have criticised that test and said, well, look, just because something only applies to one person doesn't mean it's important. So I think there's a lot of, I say that has been criticised, and some people have suggested that that test should be relaxed so you don't have to show the wider public interest. And I must confess that's an argument I am quite sympathetic to. So what's happening now? Well, it's all listed for this appeal on October the 13th. Now, the local authority, the council again, they have applied to the court and said, can you knock this back 6 weeks for a period of reflection? And the court's gone, well, no. It's listed for 2 days. We're not taking it out of the diary. I mean, that again, that's not unusual. When things are listed, it's a nightmare to get the fixture broken unless it's for a very good reason. If they were to say something like, we've almost thrashed this out, we're going to settle this, so, you know, that hearing that's listed for tomorrow, knock it back a week because we might be able to work on this, they might have had a punt. But in this particular case, I'm not very surprised they got knocked back. So that's where we are. And like I say, you might want to watch this video a couple of times. I mean, first of all, I'll boost the algorithm, but also just to figure out what's happened. Because like I say, it's very confusing because there's, you know, somebody was trying to appeal a decision of the Court of Appeal. And then also the decision that's been allowed was just leave to appeal, and we haven't had the full appeal yet. That's on October the 13th. And on October the 13th, that court could well say, okay, we're going to allow the appeal, but we're going to send it all back to the first instance court for you all to thrash out again. So there you go. Confusing, eh? I had this one, my one House of Lords case, as it was then. They actually give you the judgment in advance so you can read it, because you can't actually hear anything in the chamber itself. They actually hand down the decision in the, you know, the proper chamber of the House of Lords. I remember just opening and I sort of shot to the end and I had the solicitor on the phone and it said, this appeal is dismissed. And it's like, oh no. So on the solicitor, just let my guy know that you're still a moiderer, apparently. Because what happened is my guy being convicted of murder, the Court of Appeal had overturned it, so the prosecution appealed it. But the funny thing, like I say, oh no, we've lost. But then the very nice prosecutor came over and said, Alan, this was our appeal, remember? That means you've won. Because I'm so used to just being, you know, on the losing side. It was a bit of a novelty. But there you go. As always, hope you found that vaguely interesting, vaguely informative, and vaguely accurate. And like I say, oh, it's stopped raining now. It's typical. I'll show you around here because it's actually quite pretty. Like I say, this is called Sunny Corner. It's just outside Truro. So you've got all the boats tied up here. It's a great place to do a video about how you arrest a boat by putting the notice on the mast, because most of these boats down here all have that notice on because none of them ever pay the mooring fees.